Good morning, guys. Today is Monday, and it is the 26th of April. And this is LNM2, and we're doing a review of the final exam that you just given me a couple of days ago. Actually, yesterday was the deadline, and so I'm going through it. And as I wrote in my email to you, unfortunately, I cannot accept any tests handed in after I go through the final result here. Hold on. For these reasons, I'm just going to admit people in, and here we go. Good morning. So I'm going to go through each example, and then I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview of what is in store for us on semester 5. Semester 3. You are the morning session, and next semester, hey, how are you? It's like a Facebook Live sort of thing, except that I'm six hours ahead of you, and I'm in a completely different part of the world, different temperature, different everything, different time zone, different culture, different temperature. The spring is about a month behind the United States, where I am at the moment. So it's actually quite cold here. Yesterday morning, we had frost on our window. So I know in New York, I think the temperature is about 81 today, right? Something like that. Right now.
Right now it says it's 48 degrees and it's
Okay.
going up to 61.
Okay, so, all right. But I think we checked the temperature yesterday. I think it was pretty warm one of these days, either coming or just past, whatever. It's all good. So I'm going to go through each example of the final exam so you can see where you are. You can sort of correct your own test. You'll know exactly where you were right and where you might have gone wrong. And then I think on Thursday, Wednesday and Thursday, that will be 2 days from now, and 3 days from now, we have the juries, which I'm going to attend remotely while I'm cooking. It's all good. And next week we'll see. I can't remember if there are finals next week. I have to check in with that. Then I will give just another lesson, sort of previewing the next semester. But first, let's deal with the exam. The first example is in G. G, good. I think you can see that. And that is a 5/7 going to a 1 in the key of G major. Right? Yes. Okay, and I gave you the bass, and I gave you the resolution. So here we go from scale degree 5 to scale degree 1, as we would do in root position of the dominant 7 chord. It's a bit of glare. I'll try to sort of even that out. Good. Get the thumbs up. Very good. So we can see that the bass goes up. So therefore, we will try to find a note that for sure is going to go down to meet the sort of general tendency that we prefer of writing in contrary motion between the outer voices. Since the bass goes up, we're going to find scale degree 4 here, going to 3 here. And that would be scale degree 4 in the key of G, would be C, going one step down to B. And then basically I fill in this chord here, which would be a D7 chord. And here would be my root tonic, which is G. And I'm going to fill in the notes in close position. If you want to outline what notes you have in the dominant 7 chord, you simply just write it up in root position. Here is my dominant 7 chord starting on D. And I see that I have the D in the bass, and I have the C now in the soprano. And I need to place an A, and I have to place an F sharp. And I have to do that in close position. So A would go in here because F sharp would leave a room, and that's not the best way of writing. It's a possible way. And here we have obviously a little bit of a choice because we can put the F sharp down here. If some of you did that, that's not wrong, but you can see the problem is a little bit that these two voices here are colliding. If you did this, this is perfectly fine. And the only issue is that the bass, as you can see, is leaping up to above where the tenor was in the previous measure. So if I did this, for instance, I would have D going to G, perfectly fine, but the better solution, so that's called voice crossing. If the bass is leaping up to above where the tenor was in the previous measure, that's called voice crossing. It's not considered ideal. So therefore, the better solution, but if you did this, what I just outlined with the F sharp down here, that would be fine too. It's just not considered, it's like a 95% solution. This solution here is considered better. And here I simply just resolve the last note down like that. So that is the, and now we've accounted for all these notes. That is considered the perfect ideal solution to example number one. If you have something else, there are other solutions that are possible that could, be rewarded. When actually, I think in all music theory, there's no right or definitely right or wrong answer. There's some definitely wrong answers for sure, but there are many answers that could qualify as the correct answer, where you've accounted for all these things that we're studying at the moment. Okay, so if you don't have this exact solution, do not panic, because I will evaluate every example in a professional manner and reward you for the right way of handling this stuff. Okay, so that's example number one. I will erase. I don't have my usual eraser, but that's fine. Any cloth will do. Okay, so that's example number one. Number two is in F minor. The wrong way of going about this is to say, and this is unfortunately the traditional way of doing it, is to say F minor has 4 flats, and then you dutifully write up all the 4 flats, and you're not going to need many of them. And it will, first of all, lead you completely astray, because you'll find that your leading tone has been lowered, because in F minor, you will have an E flat, and that's not the kind of E that we're wanting. We want the E that you find in F major. So my admonition to you, my advice to you have been all along, write all the examples as if you are in the major key. Just do that. Do not worry about that it's an F minor and has 4 flats. All that is correct, but that's too much information. It's not going to help much. Just going to check what variation. Okay, so we have a 5, 6, 5 and a 1 chord here. So 5, 6, 5 and 1. In this case, it would be lowercase Roman numeral. So this would be in minor. You can see that from the minus sign here as well. And here I've been kind to you. I understand that, because I've actually given you the E natural. So you cannot change that. Do not, whatever you do, this is a piece of good advice to when you're going to graduate school or whatever you're doing after NIAC. Do not change anything that's on the exam, even if it's a mistake. Because there are sometimes mistakes in exams, right? And sometimes people, we're all only human, and sometimes we make mistakes, but do not change it. So I've given you already the kind of E that I want you to deal with in the key of F minor, and that will be the raised leading tone. So scale degree 7 here has been raised. And I've also given you the resolution. So F is the same. And again, we can see that we're going up with the bass. So therefore, the procedure is really the same as it is, or as it was for the first example. You have to understand, what is the dominant 7 chord of F minor? It's a C dominant 7 chord. Because if you start in F, then F, G, A, B flat, C. No matter if you know that there's a C, there's a B flat, you will still end up with C, so that's a good thing. So you can now write that up if you want. You don't even need to write up the quote unquote correct inversion. It will be the first inversion, so the C would be supposedly up here, and you would have E natural here in the bass. But that really doesn't matter so much because I've already placed the leading tone in the bass for you. It's a little bit, I understand we're doing this sort of with training wheels, and that's perfectly fine. All I need you to absorb from this lesson is how to do it the easiest and most correct way that we know of. Bass going up, so therefore we're going to find a note that goes down in these other notes. This one here is gone, we don't need to worry about that one. And the note that goes down in that chord is the B flat. And that would be scale degree 4 in the key of F. So again, we're placing scale degree 4, going to 3, in whatever key we're in. Write out the bass. Now I've done that for you. Then write the soprano. Do not start stacking, because you will not be able to, or you will with a great deal of difficulty, would you be able to line up all the voices so they fit and can be sung. Instruments, not such a problem. Instrumentalists are playing from chord charts, and they're playing whatever voicing feels most natural under the fingers, or whatever chord voicings that they know. But when you're singing things where you have no valves, no frets, no keys, it's a different thing. You have to proceed in a quite different ways sometimes. Anyway, this one here, we can see that in the key of F minor, this one here would be lowered by a half step compared to major. And that is the only thing you need to think about. As I said repeatedly, we're still learning, it is an exam, but an exam is a great opportunity to learn, to pick up these little bits and pieces that we know. Here, I placed now the B flat, I placed the E, and I have to place a G, and I have to place a C. The G is the closest note I can find to the B flat. So the G is now gone, and I have to place a C, and that'll be here. You cannot place it any lower because the next C down would be here. So it sort of writes itself. If you've written out the bass, which I've done for you, then write the soprano and then write down from the soprano. I know I keep reiterating this, but it's so important that you can hear yourself saying that. In the beginning, you'll probably say it with my voice or something like that. But later on, that voice would be in the background and you would learn your craft because it's been said over and over and over again. That is the commitment to teaching at the elementary level, that you have the commitment to keep repeating these things until they sit with the students. Resolving, very easy. We know that scale degree 5, when it sits in an inner voice, you can just leave it there. Scale degree 2, which this will be, the G is scale degree 2 in the key of F, would go down to 1 when we're resolving. And we understand as well that there's one variation that we'll get to in a second, where things are behaving slightly differently, just very slightly differently. So now I've accounted for all the notes, and this is the considered, or would be considered, the most correct resolution. If this was an F major, all you will have to do is to erase the A flat and turn it into an A natural. And very, very often in the key of any minor mode, you would see a variation where you actually end up in the tonic major. That's called a Picardy third, and that's considered just a completely normal procedure, especially in music, I would say before the 18th century. And even into the 18th century, they'll be considered completely normal that the tonic can be substituted, the minor tonic can be substituted for the major, called Picardy third. Very, very common procedure. Okay, onwards. C minor, and 5, 4, 3, going to 1. Like that. So we now see the reverse dynamic going on. We have a bass that is descending, that is going down, and therefore we must react in the exact opposite way to that by placing a note in the soprano that goes up to create this sort of desired contrary motion that we like. Why do we like contrary motion? Because it creates independence between the voices automatically. And you don't have to worry about parallel perfect intervals, parallel fifth, parallel octaves, not an issue. So instead of teaching it in the negative, say you cannot write parallel octaves or parallel fifths, we put it in the positive to say, well, what can you do that will not even make this an issue? The answer to that is almost always, not always, but almost always to write in contrary motion. So we will analyze what is this chord. It is the 5/7 chord of C. So that will be a G dominant 7, major triad with a minor 7 on top. Major triad, minor 7th. The fact that it's listed as a 4/3 above that D is because it is inverted twice. So if I inverted this chord twice, you will see that D was in the bass, and there will be a 4 and a 3 and also 6. But I mean, those two intervals would be the determining factors that are the reason why we call this a 5/4/3 chord. So which one of these notes, D is accounted for, we don't need to worry about that one. Which one is the leading tone in the key of C? The leading tone is a half step below the tonic. That will be B natural, and that's the one we're going to put here in the soprano. That will create contrary motion because that is sure to go up, scale to be 7. Remember that we isolated this exercise a great deal prior to writing all these full chords out by saying 7 goes to 8, 4 goes to 3, and then we flipped them around and we did all sorts of exercises with these two entities. And all I have to do now, I have now placed my B, I have to place a G, and I have to place an F. And I have two choices here. The G, I can see, is the closest note that I can get to the B. And in the key of C, that will be scale to be 5. And if that is in an inner voice, I can just keep it. If scale to be 5, inner voice, keep it. Then, so now G is accounted for. Now the F. Now, if I place it down here, which is fine, then it will go here. Scale degree 4, which is the F, will then go to scale degree 3. And this time you will notice that it is in the minor mode, so therefore it goes to E flat. You simply just, the principal difference between the major and the minor mode is just the lowering of the third scale degree in that key. That's the principal difference. All the other chords functionally remain flexible because they can be used, at least in gospel music and in jazz and in late romantic music. You have a total interchangeability, what the jazz players call modal interchange, and what classical musicians tend to refer to as modal mixture. You have what is called secondary modal mixture. So that means that the relative major and minor are wide open, and the parallel major and minor, meaning C major and C minor, all the chords that are available in C major are also available in C minor. That creates that particular flavor of gospel music and late romantic classical music that we all know by ear, and this is the explanation for it. So simply just write out of the major mode and just lower the third scale degree, and be prepared that all the things that come before this step can be those that are common to the major mode and those that are also common in the minor mode, and they can be totally interchanged easily, because that is what creates that unique sort of flavor. Okay, that one is one option. If you had, let me just write example number 2, that is probably even more correct than this one, because the only problem with this one here is that the tenor is pretty low. You know, they're not going to have a lot of power down there. It is sort of the bassist domain, and therefore the tenors are not going to be very effective down there. They can still sing down there, but not with a lot of power. But you could put the F up here, which I recommend, and then the E flat here. That would be, I think, the better solution. But both are correct. We don't really have a context, right? Not yet. So therefore, both are completely acceptable. Goody goody. All are good. Both are good. No panic. The next example is in D, and it's 5-4-3, going to 1-6. So here you can see that we are using the dominant 7 chord in second inversion as a tonic expansion or tonic prolongation chord. We are using this chord as a passing chord between the tonic and the tonic in first inversion. So again, we have to understand that we are starting here, and I've given you the bass. We're starting with the second scale degree in the bass, and that goes up to the third scale degree. In this case, because we're in the major mode, is F sharp, and I've given you that already, so you can't do that wrong, unless you correct the exam, which you shouldn't do, because it will throw you off. Let me. It's better. And then I've also given you the soprano, because that is really not completely easy to understand, I believe, until a little bit later. When we've done this enough times, you'll say, okay, I get that. We will understand that the dominant 7 chord, again, just write it up, in the key of D is A dominant 7. So A, whoops, that gets an eraser, that one. Not that it was the wrong note, it wasn't, but it didn't look correct. This still doesn't look good. Anyway, so A major triad with a minor 7. Just think minor 7, think whole step down from the root of the chord. And so here we've accounted for the E, that one you don't have to worry about. The G is also gone. And we can see that the G is in fact scale degree 4 in the key of D. And here's the anomaly, and that's why I'm writing in both the soprano and the bass for you with this example here, because scale degree 4 going to 5 is not a common occurrence. That happens with this one here. It also happens a little bit later in what we call the Phrygian half cadence, where the soprano goes from scale degree 4 to scale degree 5. That's a little bit unusual, so therefore I'm giving you both voices here. You don't have to really worry too much about that right now. You just have to say, okay, let me fill in the rest of the voices here. E and G are gone. I have to place a C sharp, and I have to place an A. So so the A is a little bit difficult to place, but at the same time, it really isn't, because I can't place it above the G. That will be close position, obviously, because A and G are the 2 notes that are next to each other, but I can't place the A above the soprano. That's why I'm very fastidious with teaching you how to do, when you do voicing, immediately put a stem on your note, because then you know which voice it belongs to. So that means that by process of elimination, the best note to put in here in the tenor is the note A. That's gone now. And that leaves C sharp, must be here. Okay. And then C sharp, there you go. Drying up a little bit. Goody, goody. And you simply go to the closest position that you can with all these here. Scale degree 5, inner voice, leave it. This one here, leading tone, must go here. And then the eagle-eyed among you, let me just write this one a little bit clearer, might see, I hope you will see, that this looks like parallel fifths, because this is a fifth and this is also a fifth. But the thing is that this one here is not a perfect fifth. This one here is what we call a tritone. It's a diminished fifth. It's a little shorter than the normal perfect 5. So therefore, these are not considered parallel fifths. This is perfectly good part writing. And in fact, the reason why a lot of composers are using this progression and have no sort of compunctions in using it is the fact that you don't create any sort of illegal parallel fifths here, because one of them is a diminished fifth. So that is the preferred solution to this example here. Again, you can sort of correct yourself. You have a copy, I'm sure, an electronic copy of your exam. You can see where you stand. This is recorded. You can view it as many times as you want, and these are the correct notes, or the ones that are most correct. If you have other notes, it's very possible that you have some that is totally acceptable, but this one here would be the solution that I'm looking for, first of all. Okay, so the final example. But when you look at this, by the way, I'm just sort of thinking about this, that, oh, it's already over. But there's a lot of details to keep track of here. There really are quite a lot of details. And what is the main takeaway from this? It's not spelling of chords. We could do that. You could do that in theory 1. Here we're really learning some solid part writing skills of combining all these different chords in ways that are also the ways in which we would combine all other chords. The principles are really the same. It's the thinking behind it that is so important to get in. And if you get it in right away, it just never leaves you. It's just, you'll learn it once and for all. And you just have to think back to the sort of general principles of contrary motion, finding the note that has a tendency. They're called tendency tones, by the way, because they have a tendency to move either up or down. The ear can hear this. And when you play these chords, you can sort of play each note by itself and think, is this a stable or an unstable tone? Does it have a tendency in my expectation of moving? And if so, do I hear it as going up or down? This is very, very much an ear training skill that is also built at the same time. And that way of listening in details to what the notes want to do by themselves as entities that are not just things that we've decided. We've decided that, a dominant 7 chord moves to a tonic. That is really an acoustic phenomenon. I know it's very much a product of culture, meaning that we've heard it a number of times. But it is more than that, also a natural tendency of the acoustics of combining certain notes with each other. That certain notes become unstable because there are certain intervals. When you hear 2 notes together, there are certain intervals that are more prone to being perceived as being unstable. It's the perception part, obviously, that is the interesting part in a way. That's the area of neuroscience. How does the brain actually process information like that, or process sound? Now, that's a very, very interesting area and something that is a little bit outside of, normal music theory, but something that is really, really interesting. And I think will be the next frontier in understanding, acoustics and music theory and human psychology, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's very, very interesting. Okay, so 5-4-2, oops, going to 1-6. And I've given you the note A flat and G. So I'm going to write this one up, and I say to myself, scale degree 5 in the key of E flat. You can count 5 steps up. If you're uncertain, write up your E flat scale, whole, whole, half, whole, and then whole, whole, half again. That's your major scale. And you'll find that scale degree 5 in the key of E flat is B flat. And I'm going to write a B flat, major triad like that, major third, minor third, and then I'm going to go a whole step down from B flat and I find A flat. So these are the notes that I have in my B flat dominant 7 chord. Also remember that if you think this exam, if you found that, this is easy, well, that's a good thing, because we're actually using all the keys, both major and minor, that we can find. That's I just want to point out that that's no small accomplishment, because in traditional, this is traditional theory, but I mean, in the way music theory is traditionally taught, there is a great distinction in the beginning about what keys are perceived as being difficult and what keys are perceived as being not, easier. I don't think it works like that, as you well know. I throw my students right into all the difficult keys right away because the principles are the same. They're all the same. Okay, this one here, A flat is gone. I see that the bass is going down. Principle, again, which note is sure to go up, and that will be the leading tone. So that one I'm going to place in my soprano. I can either place it down here or up here, whatever. This one is spread out a little bit, as you can see. But that one is sure to go up because that goes to E flat when we're moving here. And now A flat is gone, it's in the bass. D is gone. I have to place an F, and I have to place a B flat. And I simply have to place them in close position. B flat is as close to D as you can get. And so now B flat is gone. The F could be down here, or an octave up. If you have an octave up, that's fine. I tend to like that. I like a high tenor. And why is that? Well, here's an opportunity for me to hammer this point home. If the tenors are singing in a slightly higher register, first of all, they blend better because most tenors will have to do a falsetto at that point, and therefore they blend better with the female voices. And they thereby set themselves apart from the other male voice, which is the bass. That's a good consideration for blending, right? But the other thing is also that if you're, let's say you start out in a church with a volunteer chorus, for instance, you will be lucky to have 2 or maybe just 1 tenor. Whereas you will have a number of sopranos, and the sopranos and the tenors are actually the ones competing because they're singing more or less in the same register, but an octave apart. And therefore they tend to cover each other. The tenors are always a problem because there are not many male voices nowadays that are natural tenors. One of the reasons for that is that we are taller as a species now, and therefore our vocal cords are also longer, and therefore men tend to sing in a lower register compared to when much of this church repertoire was written. So therefore, a high tenor is good because all tenors can do that little flip of their voice called falsetto. Even basses can do that. Yes?
Can a contralto substitute for a tenor?
Yep.
I'm just wondering because I know they still sound like they don't have the same color, but they can substitute if you need it, right?
Absolutely. That is the great schism, obviously, in church music from Renaissance. In the Catholic Church, women were not participating or were not allowed to participate in the service, typically. So the voices that are now covered by female voices in the Reformed Church were covered by boy sopranos and boy altos and contraltos, etc., etc., etc. But absolutely, and you're sort of making my point in a way that a high tenor sounds more like a female voice. I mean, it's obviously not, right? But but the color becomes easier to blend with the female voices when it's in falsetto. There's no doubt about that. But it's more of an aesthetic consideration there, right? The more important point is that the tenors are going to be outnumbered by all the other voice groups. So therefore they have to sing preferably in a register where they're strong, where they project really well. I mean, you can obviously have tenors who can sing a good strong F by blending their chest voice and falsetto and all that. But that takes a trained voice to do that, to know how to do that. That's one of the things that you guys are learning by going to music school. You're not just sort of doing it off the top of your head. You're sort of learning how to do that. And you're learning, moreover, you're learning the method in how to start from one point and then gradually moving toward that goal of being able to do that. That's called pedagogy. The word pedagogy actually means how to lead a boy. That's what it means. The ped part is the walking or leading, right? And the agogy is the part. So it means that you are leading a student. In Old Greek, it's a Greek word. In Old Greek, it means to lead a boy, because boys were the only ones who were educated, of course, right? You know, that's the old world for you right there. But it's to lead a student from being a novice to being a professional, to being a consummate professional who are in control of all these different techniques, be they on the violin, the saxophone, or for the voice. The voice is probably quite possibly the most complicated instrument we have, not being an instrument, but one we're all born with in a way. But it's complicated for the fact you can't really see what's going on. You have to learn techniques to achieve certain things that were previously impossible. And that's how this repertoire really works. And if you're a choral conductor or a music minister or whatever you call it in your church, cantor, then it's upon you to know all these techniques and know how to write for voices. This is all intertwined in some way. Music theory is not just music theory, that you can do it on a board. I know I'm doing it on a board here because I'm sitting out in a little, fishing hut here in the middle of nowhere, and enjoying myself, by the way. But music theory is also the explanation of what you do in actual musical practice. At least that's the way we do it at this school. So these are all good techniques to know. So in summary, if you put the tenor up here, I'll be very happy, but you don't need to. In the key of E flat, B flat would be your scale of B5. If it's in an inner voice, just keep it. This will be scale degree 2, going down to scale degree 1. And now you can see the problem is that the tenor is quite low, but it's not bumping into the bass. So I deliberately put this bass quite low as well. The only two voices that are desirable to keep apart are actually the tenors and the basses. If you have good basses, but even if you don't, because the bass can be reinforced and very often is reinforced by an instrument, let's say a double bass or bassoon or just a piano, or electric bass if you're in a modern gospel church. All this is fine because they're reinforcing the voices, so you can keep a low bass, and even if the basses are, being an octave up, then you definitely have to have the tenors up to blend and to create this good register for them, right? But if you have a bass that is as low as it can get with good quality, the problem is that very often, if you have an untrained bass and you have a low bass, very often they'll start to creep up because they can't actually sing that low. So they'll pull the whole intonation up and up and up because they can't reach that low. So therefore they start to pull everything up. Then that goes haywire. So it's better to reinforce the bass with a bass instrument of sorts to achieve correct intonation, etc., etc., etc. This one is a perfectly good, and now we're kind of all the notes. If you had all this, at least the notes right, if you had these registers too, then you are sitting absolutely wonderfully, very well, very pretty, as we say, you know, and in preparation. So, call coming in. Then you're sitting very, very well for semester 3 in this course. Let me give a little preview. Any questions so far? Okay, we're good, right? Fantastic. Thumbs up. I like to see that. Okay, so let me give you a little preview, the class, of what is ahead of us next semester. Just a little preview. I'm just going to simply just outline what we're doing next semester so you sort of have an idea. And as I said, I'm going to check if I'm teaching next week. That will be perfectly fine because we can get a jump start on next semester. I'll outline now what will be in store, and then next week I can follow up and fill in some of the things that I'm going to outline now. Right now, what we've done is this. We basically outlined the dominant 7 chord and the tonic. We can also put letter names to this. This is dominant, so for D for dominant, usually dominant 7. That's what we've been doing for a while, you know, but it can also be without. So this is a pretty roomy identification with the D, because it can be a 5/7 like this. It can be a 5/6/5. It can be a 5/4/3 or 5/4/2. And as we know, the 5/4/3 can behave in one of 2 ways, either as a stop chord, a cadential chord, when it leads you to the tonic in root position, or it can also be used as a tonic expansion chord, where it takes you further into the tonic in first inversion. And then there's a number of ways that we can go from there. And what we're going to add to this next semester is some sort of predominant. So that is, in the olden days, that was called dominant preparation. So they had sort of flipped it around a little bit. And that is not the only way to understand what we now call the predominant. It's typically a 2 chord or it is a 4 chord. And I'm just going to make them actually, well, this, hold on, I made a mistake here. This is almost always at least a minor chord. It can sometimes be a diminished chord too. So a 2 or a 4 chord, going to a 5 chord, and then going to a 1. So why are we doing this? Well, it turns out, I mean, this is, if you've sort of snooped around a little bit and maybe participated in some of the discussions that Professor Carlos has presented, this is known as a phrase model. Okay, so a phrase model is a predominant, a dominant, and a tonic. Very, very often we would add to this a tonic in this end. So very often a piece of music or a song in tonal harmony would start out in the tonic. However, that's not always a given, because very, very often, especially in again, jazz and late romantic music, you will have a sort of little bit of a wake-up call in the beginning, particularly with the sort of middle Beethoven period. He would very often start out in the quote-unquote the wrong key. And that is a tagline that jazz players have sort of taken up and really, really exploited, because that's one thing that they really love to do. If you think about many sort of popular tunes from the Broadway repertoire, they would particularly do that. They love to do that, love to start out in the wrong key and then gradually ease into the right key. And so on and so on. After many, many measures of sort of circling around, trying to find the tonic, we will then arrive at Sweet Georgia Brown when we hit the tonic. It's a very common way to structure a song. It comes from late romantic music. I keep making these comparisons because we think, and many people, you know, the problem in the modern academy of teaching music students is that all the jazzers think that their repertoire originated as a protest against traditional repertoire. That's probably true in some ways. And particularly if you talk to rock musicians, they think that, oh, you know, this whole protest against traditional music or whatever. And some of it is, but the curious thing is that they're using the same models as the ones they're trying to protest. So it ends up being a little bit of a battle of opinions in a way, because I can see, and so the problem is that most of the jazz musicians who are teaching jazz theory, they don't know the classical repertoire well enough. And perhaps we can forgive them for that, because their repertoire, with all due respect to the classical tradition, is probably more common and more used in this day and age. And it is definitely fair to say that classically trained musicians do not really at all know the jazz repertoire. I know this because that's the world I'm from. And I must say that before I started teaching at NIAC, there was a lot of repertoire that I didn't really know. I may have known it by ear, but I didn't know how it worked until my students, over many years of wearing in this sort of way of teaching, that they told me, that's the same as we're doing in church. We're doing it this way and we're calling it this, and so on. So I could see that there's a great, great deal of comparison that was possible. And therefore I'm going to refer, as you well know already, refer back and forth to these two bodies of repertoire, these two bodies of songs and procedures that we know in both worlds. They're called something different, but they're really the same procedure. And this, in the jazz world, would be called a 2-5-1 progression. And in blues, it would be called a 4-5-1, except that the 4 and the 5 are now reversed in the blues. But they're the same procedure. It's almost like identifying, this one is just a medieval screwdriver. There were no screws in the Middle Ages, right? But they had a similar thing that you can see. They definitely worked in the same way. And here's the tool that does that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't use this way of understanding music. This particular word and the way of understanding tonal harmony comes in America from a music theorist called Heinrich Schenker. And if you have followed some of Professor Carlos's debates, he has talked about Heinrich Schenker in a historical light, because he's apparently has become a sort of controversial figure in the modern American academy. However, he's just really codifying, at least music theory, in terms of his music theory, is codifying things that are still in current use. So if his model is something that we should now, if we're woke and informed and all that, if we should frown upon that, then that takes out the entire repertoire of jazz and gospel as well. And I don't think that that's a fruitful way of looking at this. I do think, however, that this identification of certain chords that are grouped into predominance, certain groups of chords, there will be the 5, and we can also by extension say the 7 chord, and there'll be a diminished triad or diminished 7 chord sometimes, that we can identify these as belonging to the same group. And thereby we have a 3-step rocket that really covers almost all the repertoire that we call tonal. So therefore, we would just identify this theory behind it as tonal theory and not pass it out like jazz theory, gospel theory, and classical theory. I know that they do that in all college programs, including ours. We have gospel harmony class, right? And we have jazz theory class, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as people understand that these procedures have been used for ages and ages, for centuries before a particular style emerged, either in supposed rejection of the one that came before. I mean, that's the history of music in general, that if a new style is developed, it is almost always a confrontation of what came before and say, out with the old, in with the new. It's just that the new is just like the old, just in a slight variation thereof. And that's fine. You know, every new generation define themselves in ways that they understand, and they only understand. They think that those who came before don't understand it. We understand it differently. You will all know this when you have kids. They'll tell you exactly how much you suck, just like you do with your parents. And so this is a preview of the next semester. We're going to hammer this group of chords. There's a great deal of confluence between all the 2 chords and all the 4 chords, because most of them, or all of the ones we're going to be dealing with in the first step of this sort of evolution, have scale degree 4 in the bass. We're used to that scale degree 4 as part of the dominant 7 chord, and that it's usually an extension of the dominant 7 chord, i.e., it is the chordal 7th of scale degree 5. That is scale degree 4. We've seen how that behaves. Just roll the tape back, or the recording. The digits, roll the digits back, move your cursor, whatever. But now we're going to deal with scale degree 4 when it's a structural member and it appears in the bass as something that generates the harmony above it. That's what's in store for next semester. And that's going to be, in the beginning, 7 different chords that are behaving more or less the same way. They all lead you to 5, and then we go back to 1. So that's it from Late Woebegone here. We'll be tuning in next week if there's class. If there's finals week, I will have to determine if your time is better spent doing your other finals, because we've already finished, because we're ahead of time. You know, we covered everything we should this semester and then some. And you guys have been ahead of time because you've done your work. And all the exams I'm getting in are pretty good. You know, very few are 100%. But that's fine, because most of you carried a pretty good result in the midterm. And we're just going to put it all in the pot, stir it up, and see what comes out. Okay, so over and out from here. See you next week, maybe. Or if not, then have a great finals week, and we'll see you next semester. Have a great
God
summer.
bless. Enjoy your fishing.
And love you all. Bye.